The rain drummed against the corrugated metal of the abandoned overpass like fingers tapping an endless prayer. Miguel Hernandez pressed his back against the concrete pillar, watching rivulets of water carve temporary rivers through the dust and debris that had become his congregation. 37 years on this earth, and he learned that God spoke loudest in the spaces between raindrops. His weathered hands clutched a water-stained Bible, pages soft as tissue from countless readings. The leather cover had long since given way to duct tape and hope. Inside the front cover, written in his grandmother's careful cursive, "Mijo, when the world grows dark, remember, even shadows prove there is light somewhere." But where was that light now? The cardboard beneath him had turned to mush weeks ago, yet Miguel remained. This patch of forgotten concrete had become his cathedral, his Gethsemane, his wrestling ground with the divine. Cars rushed overhead, their occupants warm and dry, carrying briefcases full of certainty and refrigerators full of abundance. Down here, in the belly of the city's forgotten places, faith felt like trying to hold water in cupped palms. A child's laugh echoed from somewhere in the maze of support pillars. High and pure, it cut through the urban symphony like a bell. Miguel's head lifted, searching the shadows. In 23 months of sleeping under this bridge, he'd never heard a child's voice here. This was a place for the discarded, the invisible, the lost, not for innocence. The sound came again, closer now, followed by the rapid patter of small feet on wet pavement. A girl, maybe 7 years old, appeared from behind a pillar, her school backpack bouncing as she ran. Her dark hair was plastered to her head from the rain, and her frozen lunchbox left a trail of drops like breadcrumbs. What was a child doing here? Where were her parents? Miguel's instincts, honed by years of surviving on the streets, prickled with alarm. Children didn't wander into places like this alone. They were brought. And when children were brought to places like this, it usually meant. The black sedan materialized from the rain like a nightmare-given form. Its windows were too dark, its approach too deliberate. Miguel watched as it crept along the service road that ran beneath the overpass, predatory and patient. The engine's purr was barely audible above the rain, but Miguel heard it the way prey hears the whisper of wings before the strike. The girl, Isabella, he would learn later, had stopped running. She stood in the center of the concrete cavern, spinning slowly with her arms outstretched, catching raindrops on her tongue. 7 years old and still believing the world was made of wonder instead of wounds. The car door opened without a sound. Miguel's body moved before his mind could catalog all the reasons why intervening was dangerous, foolish, potentially fatal. He was a homeless man with a rap sheet, a history of addiction, and hands that shook from withdrawal and malnutrition. Who would believe him? Who would listen? But his grandmother's voice echoed through his memory. Faith isn't believing God will keep you safe, Mijo. Faith is trusting that doing right matters even when it doesn't feel safe. His feet found purchase on the slick concrete. His voice, and used for days, cracked like old leather as he called out. "Isabella, come here, sweetheart. Your mama's looking for you." The girl turned, confusion blooming across her face. She didn't know him, had never seen him before, but something in his tone, some quality of authentic concern, made her take a step in his direction. The man emerging from the sedan paused, his hand hovering near the car door. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of calculated casual appearance that screamed expensive therapy and hidden appetites. His eyes swept over Miguel, cataloging him as a threat, a witness, a complication. "She's with me," the man called out, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "Isabella, honey, come to Uncle David." The girl's face crinkled with genuine confusion. "I don't have an Uncle David." Miguel's heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Every instinct screamed at him to fade back into the shadows, to become invisible again. He had nothing, no phone, no credibility, no way to call for help that wouldn't result in his own arrest. But the girl stood there, small and trusting, and the rain kept falling, and somewhere in the sound of it Miguel heard what might have been the voice of God or might have been the echo of his grandmother's prayers. "Isabella," he said again, his voice steadier now. "Walk to me. Slow and easy." The man in the expensive jacket took 2 steps forward. His smile was the kind that looked right in photographs but felt wrong in person. "Sir, I don't know what you think you're doing," but I think I'm keeping a child safe from a stranger who knows her name but isn't her family." Miguel's words hung in the air like a challenge. The rain intensified, turning the concrete around them into a shallow lake that reflected the gray sky like broken mirrors. For a moment, the three of them existed in tableau: the homeless man with trembling hands and unshakable resolve, the child caught between safety and danger, and the predator calculating odds. Isabella made the choice for all of them. She ran to Miguel, her small hand finding his scarred one with the kind of trust that exists only in children and saints. Her fingers were cold and sticky from the lunchbox handle, but they anchored him to the moment, to the decision, to the consequences that would follow. The man's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something hungry and desperate underneath. Then he was back in his car, the engine roaring to life, tires spinning on wet asphalt as he disappeared into the maze of city streets. Miguel knelt in the puddle, his knees soaking through his jeans, and looked into Isabella's dark eyes. She was shivering now, the adrenaline wearing off, the reality of near-miss danger settling over her like a cold blanket. "Where's your mama, sweetheart?" "She works at the hospital. I was walking home from school and took the wrong turn and got lost, and then it started raining, and..." The words tumbled out in a rush, punctuated by chattering teeth. Miguel looked up at the overpass, at the traffic flowing overhead like a river of light and motion. Somewhere up there was the normal world, where children belonged, where safety was more than just an illusion. Down here was only him, and the rain, and the echo of footsteps that might have belonged to angels or might have been nothing at all. He took off his jacket, the only one he owned, stolen from a donation box behind a church 3 winters ago, and wrapped it around Isabella's shoulders. It smelled like the streets and poor choices and the kind of hope that comes from having nothing left to lose, but it was warm and dry and real. "Let's get you home." Maria Elena Gutierrez never forgot faces. It was a gift and a curse in equal measure, this ability to catalog the contours of every person who passed through her emergency room. 17 years of nursing had given her a mental filing system more precise than any computer database, organized not by names or social security numbers, but by the quality of pain in someone's eyes. That's why she recognized him immediately, even cleaned up and 26 years older. The man sitting in the hospital waiting room wore clothes that fit properly for the first time in decades. His hair was cut and combed, his face clean-shaven, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee with the reverent care of someone who remembered when such simple luxuries were beyond reach. But the eyes were the same, dark brown, weathered by too much seeing, touched with the kind of sadness that comes from witnessing more of humanity's cruelties than its kindnesses. Miguel Hernandez, the homeless man who had saved her daughter. Maria Elena's hand trembled as she reached for the chart in her hand. 26 years ago, she had been a young single mother working double shifts to make ends meet, trusting that the universe would keep her 7-year-old daughter safe on the short walk from school to the apartment complex. She had been wrong about the universe, but right about trust. It had just arrived in a form she never expected. The police had found Isabella 2 hours after she'd failed to come home, sitting in the lobby of a downtown church, wrapped in a man's jacket that smelled like the streets. She had told them about the kind homeless man who'd saved her from the scary man in the black car, but by the time they'd returned to the overpass, Miguel was gone, vanished like smoke, like a guardian angel whose work was done. For weeks, Maria Elena had searched. She'd walked every street, visited every shelter, left her phone number with social workers and beat cops, and anyone who might encounter the man who'd risked everything for a stranger's child. She'd wanted to thank him, to help him, to offer him some small measure of the safety he'd provided her daughter. But Miguel Hernandez had disappeared into the invisible spaces between society's cracks, and gradually, inevitably, life had moved forward. Isabella had grown up, graduated from college, become a teacher herself. Maria Elena had worked her way up from floor nurse to charge nurse to nursing supervisor. The memory of that rainy afternoon had settled into the sediment of family legend, the day an angel had worn the face of a homeless man. Now that same angel sat in her waiting room, looking lost and afraid in the way that only the formerly invisible could look when thrust suddenly into the light. Maria Elena checked the chart again. Miguel Hernandez, age 63. Admitted 3 days ago for complications related to diabetes and decades of untreated health issues. No insurance. No emergency contact. No family listed. The social worker's notes indicated he'd recently been placed in transitional housing after 26 years on the streets, part of a new city initiative to address chronic homelessness. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, in a position of authority and influence, finally able to help the man who'd helped her when she'd been powerless. But help came with complications now. Hospital policies, insurance regulations, professional boundaries. The institutional machinery that surrounded healing could be as complex as the healing itself. She approached him slowly, the way one might approach a wild animal that had learned to associate human attention with pain. "Mr. Hernandez?" He looked up, and for a moment she saw past the clean clothes and proper grooming to the man who'd knelt in a puddle to wrap his only jacket around a frightened child. His eyes held the same quality of careful hope she remembered, the expression of someone who'd learned not to expect good things but hadn't quite given up on them entirely. "I'm Maria Elena Gutierrez, the nursing supervisor. I wanted to speak with you about your treatment plan." The name registered slowly, like sunlight penetrating deep water. She watched understanding dawn across his features, followed immediately by a complex mixture of joy, embarrassment, and something that might have been fear. "Isabella's mother." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Isabella's mother," she confirmed. "And you're the man who saved my daughter's life." The waiting room continued its familiar chaos around them. Phones ringing, visitors arriving, the eternal dance of institutional healthcare. But for a moment they existed in a bubble of recognition and gratitude that transcended the sterile environment. Miguel's hands shook as he set down his coffee cup. "I've thought about her every day for 26 years. Wondered if she was safe, if she was happy, if what I did mattered." Maria Elena felt tears threaten, fought them back with the professional composure she'd learned to wear like armor. "She's a teacher now. 3rd grade. She tells her students about you sometimes, about the importance of helping others even when it's hard, even when it's scary. She remembers? She remembers everything. The way you called her name like you'd known her forever. The way your jacket smelled like rain and hope. The way you knelt down to her level so she wouldn't be afraid." Maria Elena paused, steadying herself. "She remembers that you were the first person to teach her that sometimes angels don't look the way we expect them to." Miguel closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I wasn't any kind of angel. I was just a broken man who couldn't stand by and watch something terrible happen to someone innocent." "Maybe that's what angels are," Maria Elena said quietly. "Broken people who choose to act anyway." The silence that followed was comfortable, companionable. Around them, the hospital hummed with its endless rhythm of crisis and healing. But here in this small pocket of recognition, something else was taking place. A circle was closing. A debt was being acknowledged, though not in the way either of them had expected. "Your insurance situation," Maria Elena began carefully. "There are programs we can apply for. Resources for people transitioning from homelessness. I can help you navigate the system." Miguel nodded, but she could see the familiar wariness returning to his expression. A lifetime of broken promises and institutional failures had taught him to be cautious of help that came with conditions. "I don't want charity," he said. "I just want to get well enough to take care of myself." "It's not charity," Maria Elena replied. "It's community. It's what we do for each other when we have the chance." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You gave me the most precious gift imaginable 26 years ago. You gave me my daughter's future. Let me give you something in return, not because you owe me anything, but because that's how grace works. It circulates. It returns." Miguel studied her face, looking for the catch, the hidden cost, the inevitable disappointment. But all he found was sincerity, backed by the kind of institutional power that could actually make a difference. "I don't know how to be helped," he admitted. "I've been invisible for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be seen. Maria Elena smiled, and in that smile he caught a glimpse of the young mother who had once been desperate enough to trust a stranger with her child's safety. We'll figure it out together, she said. One day at a time. One form at a time. One small step toward the life you deserve. The apartment was a study in careful minimalism. One room, efficiency-sized, with a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate, a mini refrigerator, and 17 square feet of counter space. The walls were beige, institutional and neutral, designed to offend no one and comfort no one in particular. But to Miguel, stepping across the threshold for the first time in 26 years, it felt like entering a cathedral. His social worker, Janet Murphy, stood in the doorway with her clipboard and her professional smile, watching him take inventory of his new kingdom. Single bed with sheets that matched. Small table with 2 chairs. Window that looked out onto a courtyard where children played in the afternoons. Bathroom with a door that locked from the inside. The rents covered by the transitional housing program for the first 6 months, Janet explained, her voice carrying the practiced cheer of someone who delivered this speech several times a week. After that, we'll work on finding you employment that can sustain the payments. There are job training programs, interview coaching, support groups for people transitioning from homelessness. Miguel nodded, but his attention was caught by the light streaming through the window. Clean light, unfiltered by bridge supports or alley shadows. It fell across the small table in a perfect rectangle, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. Mr. Hernandez? Do you have any questions? He turned from the window, embarrassed to be caught in what must have looked like vacant staring. It's perfect, he said, and meant it. Thank you. Janet's professional smile softened into something more genuine. It's not much, but it's yours. A place to start over. Start over. The phrase followed Miguel through his first evening alone in the apartment. He sat at the small table as darkness settled over the courtyard, his weathered Bible open in front of him, trying to make sense of the concept. At 63, with a body worn down by decades of street living and a mind haunted by choices both made and unmade, did starting over mean anything more than simply changing locations? The silence was overwhelming. For 26 years, he'd slept surrounded by the sounds of the city, traffic, sirens, voices of other homeless people settling into their own precarious refuges. Here, the quiet pressed against his eardrums like cotton, broken only by the distant sound of television through thin walls and the occasional laugh of children playing games he'd forgotten the names of. He tried to pray, as he had every night for as long as he could remember, but the words felt different in this clean, enclosed space. On the streets, prayer had been conversation with a God who understood desperation, who spoke the language of survival and small mercies. Here, surrounded by the trappings of normal life, his prayers felt formal, stilted, as if he were using the wrong dialect in a foreign country. What am I supposed to do with this gift? The question had been haunting him since Maria Elena Gutierrez had walked into that hospital waiting room. For 26 years, he'd carried the memory of Isabella, the weight of her small hand in his, the trust in her eyes, the way she'd run to him without hesitation when safety called. That moment had been the single point of light in decades of darkness, the one unambiguous good deed in a life cluttered with regrets and missed opportunities. But now the gift had circled back, amplified and complicated. Maria Elena's help had given him not just medical treatment but this apartment, this chance, this bewildering opportunity to rejoin the world he'd fallen out of so long ago. The generosity felt enormous and terrifying in equal measure. Miguel opened his Bible to a random page, seeking guidance in the way he'd learned during his first stint in AA 30 years ago. The pages fell open to Luke, chapter 7. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. He read the passage 3 times, trying to parse its meaning in the context of his current situation. Forgiveness, love, the mathematics of grace, these were concepts he'd wrestled with through countless nights on cold concrete. But now, sitting in this warm, clean space, the verses felt like a puzzle he was missing pieces to. A knock on the door interrupted his contemplation. Miguel approached it cautiously, still adjusting to the concept of having a door that people could knock on. Through the peephole, he saw a woman about his own age holding a covered dish, her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mr. Hernandez? I'm Dorothy Chin from 3B. I brought you some soup." He opened the door, overwhelmed by the simple fact that someone had thought to bring him food. Dorothy Chin was small and compact, with laugh lines around her eyes and the comfortable posture of someone who'd made peace with both her age and her circumstances. "That's very kind, but you didn't need to." "Nonsense. You're new to the building, and everyone deserves a proper welcome." She handed him the dish, and the warmth of it seeped through the ceramic to his palms. "It's chicken and rice, nothing fancy, but it'll keep you fed while you get settled." Miguel accepted the soup with the reverence of someone who remembered when such gifts had meant the difference between eating and not eating. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Dorothy smiled. "You don't need to say anything. Just pay it forward when you can. That's how neighborhoods work. Pay it forward." Another phrase to add to the collection of concepts Miguel was trying to understand in his new life. After Dorothy left, he sat at his small table and ate her soup slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the gesture behind it. This was what normal people did for each other. Small kindnesses offered without expectation of return, the social glue that held communities together. For the first time since moving into the apartment, Miguel felt something approaching hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of survival that had sustained him on the streets, but something broader and more sustainable. The hope that came from being seen as a person worthy of welcome soup and second chances. That night, as he lay in his own bed between clean sheets, Miguel's prayers felt more natural. He thanked God for Maria Elena's kindness, for Dorothy's soup, for the simple miracle of walls and a roof and a door that locked. But mostly, he prayed for guidance about what to do with this gift of normalcy, this unexpected opportunity to matter in ways that extended beyond mere survival. Outside his window, the city hummed with its eternal rhythm of dreams and disappointments. Somewhere out there, other people were sleeping under bridges, wrapped in cardboard and hope. Miguel whispered a prayer for them too, and for the first time in decades, it didn't feel like hypocrisy. The Pflugerville Community Center smelled like industrial coffee and unrealized dreams. Miguel stood in the doorway of Conference Room B, watching a circle of mismatched chairs slowly fill with people who looked like they'd been assembled by some cosmic casting director specializing in hard luck stories. Janet Murphy had suggested the job training program with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed in second chances. "It's not just about finding work," she'd explained during their weekly check-in. "It's about finding community, about connecting with other people who understand what you're going through." What I'm going through. 3 months into his new life, Miguel still couldn't name it precisely. Reintegration, Janet called it. Recovery, said the counselors at the transitional housing program. But it felt more like learning to breathe underwater, or discovering that gravity worked differently on this side of invisibility. The group facilitator was a woman named Patricia Reeves, mid-50s, with the kind of calm competence that suggested she'd seen every variation of human struggle and wasn't surprised by any of them anymore. She waited until everyone had settled into their uncomfortable plastic chairs before beginning. "Welcome to week 3 of our job readiness program. Today we're going to talk about identifying transferable skills, the abilities you've developed that apply to traditional employment, even if you acquired them in non-traditional circumstances." Miguel shifted in his chair, wondering what skills sleeping under bridges and navigating social services had given him that might interest potential employers. Around the circle, he saw the same skepticism reflected in faces that bore the particular weariness of people who'd been let down by systems before. There was Sarah Williams, a young woman with tired eyes and track marks she tried to hide under long sleeves. David Kim, middle-aged and soft-spoken, who'd lost his construction job after a back injury and his apartment after the medical bills. Maria Santos, grandmother of 4, who'd been caring for her dying mother until the medical expenses consumed everything she'd saved over 30 years of house cleaning. Each person in the circle carried their own cartography of loss, their own understanding of how quickly stability could dissolve. But Patricia looked at them with the kind of steady attention that suggested she saw potential where they saw only damage. Let's start with you, Miguel. You mentioned you've been homeless for 26 years. What did you do to survive during that time? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Miguel felt the familiar urge to make himself small, invisible, to deflect attention with the practiced humility of someone who learned that being noticed often meant being moved along. But something in Patricia's expression, patient, genuinely curious, encouraged honesty. I learned to read people, he said slowly, to understand what they needed, what they were afraid of. I learned to be invisible when I needed to be safe, invisible when someone else needed help. I learned to make a little go a long way, to solve problems with whatever resources were available. Patricia nodded, making notes on her legal pad. Those are valuable skills in any workplace. Customer service, crisis management, resource allocation, situational awareness. What else? Miguel thought about the intricate social networks that existed among the homeless community. The informal economy of favors and information, the delicate negotiations required to maintain access to safe sleeping spots, the constant reading of weather patterns and police patrols and social service schedules. I learned to mediate disputes. People living rough, there's always conflict, over space, over resources, over territory. If you can't fight and you can't run, you learn to talk people down, to find solutions that work for everyone. Conflict resolution, Patricia wrote. Very valuable. What about teaching or mentoring? The question surprised him. Teaching. You've survived 26 years on the streets. That's expertise. Did you ever share that knowledge with newcomers? Help them learn to navigate the system? Miguel's mind drifted to the countless interactions he'd had over the years with people new to homelessness. The businessmen who'd lost everything in the recession. The teenagers aged out of foster care. The veterans struggling with PTSD and addiction. The families evicted from apartments they could no longer afford. He taught them which shelters were safe and which were dangerous, which restaurants threw away good food and when to find it, how to stay warm in winter, cool in summer, how to interact with police, with social workers, with the housed world that saw them as problems to be solved or threats to be managed. I guess I did teach people, he admitted, how to survive. How to stay human when the world treats you like you're not. How to stay human. Patricia repeated the phrase thoughtfully. That's perhaps the most important skill of all. Around the circle, Miguel saw nods of recognition. Sarah was looking at him with something approaching respect. David had straightened in his chair. Maria was smiling for the first time since the session began. The thing about survival skills, Patricia continued, is that they're really life skills. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to problem solve with limited resources, to maintain dignity in difficult circumstances, these are qualities that employers desperately need, even if they don't always know how to recognize them. The session continued with other exercises, practice interviews, resume writing, discussions about workplace culture, and professional expectations. But Miguel found himself thinking about Patricia's observation. How to stay human when the world treats you like you're not. 26 years of practice in maintaining his essential self despite circumstances designed to strip it away. After the session, as people filtered out into the parking lot, Sarah approached him hesitantly. That thing you said about staying human, she began, then stopped, struggling with the words. I've been clean for 4 months, but I still feel like I'm pretending to be a real person. Like everyone can tell I'm just faking it. Miguel studied her face, seeing past the defensive posture to the young woman underneath. She couldn't be more than 25, but her eyes held the particular exhaustion that came from fighting battles most people never had to imagine. The secret, he said quietly, is that everyone's faking it a little bit. The difference is, we know we're faking it. That makes us more honest than most people. Sarah laughed, a sound that held more surprise than humor. That's a weird way to think about it. The streets teach you weird ways to think about everything, Miguel replied. But they also teach you that you're tougher than you thought you were. And that toughness, that's real. That's something you can build on. As Sarah walked away, Miguel felt something shift in his understanding of his own situation. For months, he'd been thinking about his transition from homelessness as a form of charitable rescue, Maria Elena's gift to him in gratitude for helping Isabella. But perhaps it was something more complex than that. Not just charity but recognition. Not just rescue, but recruitment. The world needed people who understood how to stay human under impossible circumstances. It needed people who could navigate systems, mediate conflicts, survive on scarce resources, and maintain hope in the face of institutional indifference. These weren't just survival skills, they were leadership skills, developed in the crucible of the margins. That night, Miguel sat at his small table and wrote his first resume in 30 years. Under work experience, he listed his 26 years of homelessness not as a gap to be explained away, but as a position to be proud of: crisis management specialist, independent contractor. Responsibilities included resource allocation, conflict resolution, community outreach, and mentoring in high-stress environments. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. It was a different way of reading the map of his own life, a translation of experience into language that the housed world could understand and value. Outside his window, the courtyard was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through the oak trees. Miguel closed his resume file and opened his Bible, turning to Jeremiah. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future." He'd read those words countless times over the years, usually as a form of desperate petition. Tonight, for the first time, they felt like a promise being kept. The Goodwill Training Center occupied a converted warehouse on the east side of Pflugerville, all concrete floors and fluorescent lighting, and the peculiar institutional optimism of places dedicated to second chances. Miguel arrived for his first day as a donation center associate with the same mixture of anxiety and determination he'd once brought to job interviews in his previous life. Back when he'd worn suits and carried business cards and believed that success was a ladder you climbed rather than a grace you received. His supervisor was a woman named Jennifer Morris, 30-something with the boundless energy of someone who genuinely believed that retail work could be a form of ministry. She led him through the maze of donation bins and sorting tables, explaining the intricate taxonomy of used goods with the enthusiasm of a curator describing priceless artifacts. Clothes go here, sorted by gender and size. Household items over there. We separate dishes from small appliances from decorative stuff. Books and media in that section. The key is to think about dignity, she explained, pausing to refold a donated shirt with the care most people reserved for their own belongings. Every item that comes through here represents someone's life, someone's memories. We treat it accordingly. Miguel nodded, understanding instinctively what she meant. He'd lived for years wearing other people's discarded clothes, eating from their thrown-away dishes, reading their abandoned books. He knew the difference between donations that came from genuine generosity and those that came from simple disposal, the distinction between being helped and being rid of. The customers who shop here, Jennifer continued, they're not just looking for bargains. They're looking for possibility. A suit for a job interview, a dress for a wedding, toys for children who don't have much. Your job is to help them find what they need. But more than that, to help them feel like they deserve it. To help them feel like they deserve it. The phrase resonated with Miguel in ways that went beyond the requirements of his new position. How many times over the years had he been offered help that came with an undertone of judgment, charity that felt more like penance than grace? How many well-meaning people had tried to assist him while simultaneously communicating their belief that his situation was somehow a moral failing rather than a convergence of circumstances? His first customer was a young mother with 2 small children, trying to stretch a $20 bill across school clothes for both kids. Miguel watched her calculate and recalculate, holding up shirts and pants, checking sizes, checking prices, the familiar mathematics of scarcity playing out across her face. The blue shirt would look good on him, Miguel offered quietly, indicating her older son. And it's marked down to $3 this week. She looked up, startled to be seen in her careful budgeting. Is it really? I thought it was $5. Miguel checked the tag, though he'd already memorized the color coding system Jennifer had shown him. Blue tags are half off today. And he glanced around to make sure Jennifer wasn't watching, then quietly moved a yellow tag from another shirt onto a pair of jeans the woman had been considering. Looks like these are half off too. The relief in her expression was worth whatever minor policy violation he'd just committed. She left with 2 complete outfits for her children and $3 still in her wallet, walking a little taller than she'd entered. "You know those jeans weren't actually on sale," Jennifer said quietly, appearing at his elbow. Miguel tensed, prepared for discipline, for the familiar experience of having his good intentions misunderstood or unwelcome. But Jennifer was smiling. "I saw what you did, and I'm not going to write you up, because you did exactly what I would have done. The point isn't to make money off people who don't have any. The point is to help." As the days turned into weeks, Miguel found himself settling into the rhythm of the work with unexpected satisfaction. Each shift brought its own small opportunities for grace, helping elderly customers reach items on high shelves, explaining the return policy with patience rather than irritation, keeping an eye out for shoplifters not to catch them, but to understand what desperation looked like from the other side of the transaction. There was Mrs. Henderson, a widow on a fixed income who came in every Tuesday looking for romance novels and artificial flowers. Mr. Peterson, a veteran with one arm who needed help carrying purchases to his car but was too proud to ask. A stream of young mothers and elderly people and immigrants and working poor and recently unemployed, all navigating the careful choreography of making do with less. Miguel discovered that his years of reading people, a skill developed for survival on the streets, translated perfectly to customer service. He could tell when someone was embarrassed to be shopping at Goodwill, when they needed extra time to make decisions, when they were looking for something specific or just browsing for the comfort of being around things they couldn't afford elsewhere. More importantly, he could communicate without judgment. His own experience with the social services system, with the subtle and not-so-subtle ways that help could be made to feel like humiliation, had taught him the difference between assistance and condescension. "You're good at this," Jennifer told him during his 3-month review. "The customers respond to you. They trust you." Miguel considered this feedback as he walked home through the neighborhoods that separated his workplace from his apartment. Trust, such a fragile thing, earned slowly and lost quickly. On the streets, trust had been a matter of survival, knowing who was safe, who was dangerous, who could be counted on in a crisis. Here, in this different world, trust was still important but in subtler ways. The trust that allowed people to accept help without feeling diminished. The trust that made space for dignity in transactions that could easily become exercises in shame. His apartment had evolved over the months, accumulating small comforts and personal touches. A reading lamp from Goodwill for his evening Bible study. A coffee maker that Dorothy Chin had given him when she upgraded to a newer model. Photographs, not a family he'd lost touch with decades ago, but pictures he'd taken with the disposable camera Sarah from his job training group had given him. Images of the courtyard at different seasons, of his co-workers at the Goodwill store Christmas party, of the sunrise he could see from his window on clear mornings. This was what home looked like when you built it deliberately, piece by piece, relationship by relationship. Not the home he'd lost to addiction and poor choices and the cascade of circumstances that had led to those first nights sleeping rough, but something new and different and perhaps more precious for being consciously constructed. One evening in November, as Miguel was preparing for bed, his phone rang. In the 8 months since getting his own place, he'd received perhaps a dozen calls, mostly from Janet Murphy checking on his progress, occasionally from Jennifer about schedule changes. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about the area code tugged at his memory. "Mr. Hernandez? This is Isabella Martinez. I don't know if you remember me, but—" Miguel sat down heavily on his small couch, the phone suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. "Isabella, of course I remember you." Her voice was warm, confident, carrying the particular clarity that came with education and purpose. "My mother told me she found you, that you're doing well. I've been wanting to call for months, but I wasn't sure if—" "I didn't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," Miguel managed. "I've thought about you every day for 27 years. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Isabella told him about her life, her degree in elementary education, her classroom full of third graders, her husband David, and their 2 young children. She spoke about the foundation she and her mother had started, providing support services for homeless families, particularly those with children at risk. We call it the Guardian Angel Project, she explained. It's named after what happened that day under the bridge. The idea that protection comes in unexpected forms, and that everyone deserves to feel safe. Miguel listened, marveling at the life this woman had built, the way a single act of courage on a rainy afternoon had rippled outward in ways he could never have imagined. But more than that, he was struck by the matter-of-fact way she spoke about their shared history, as if his intervention had been not just life-saving but life-shaping. I tell my students about you, Isabella continued. About how courage doesn't always look heroic, how sometimes it looks like a kind stranger who's willing to get involved when someone needs help. Some of them come from difficult situations, and they need to know that there are people in the world who will stand up for them. I wasn't heroic, Miguel protested. I was just a man who couldn't walk away. Maybe that's what heroism is, Isabella replied. The inability to walk away when someone needs help. After they hung up, Miguel sat in his small living room for a long time, processing the conversation. The child he'd saved had grown up to save others. The moment of grace he'd offered had multiplied, creating a foundation, inspiring a classroom full of children, spreading in directions he'd never considered. But perhaps most remarkably, the little girl who'd trusted him enough to take his hand on that terrible day still trusted him enough to seek him out decades later, to include him in her understanding of her own story. She didn't see him as a charity case or a cautionary tale, but as a person whose choice to act had mattered in ways that extended far beyond that single rainy afternoon. Christmas Eve at the Pflugerville Community Shelter arrived with an ice storm that turned the city into a crystalline monument to the season's harsh beauty. Miguel stood in the kitchen of the emergency facility, stirring a massive pot of chili and watching through frost-etched windows as people emerged from the storm seeking warmth and safety for the night. He'd volunteered to work the holiday shift, partly because he had nowhere else urgent to be, but mostly because he remembered what Christmas felt like when you were invisible to a world celebrating abundance. The shelter would be full tonight, families displaced by the storm, individuals with nowhere else to go, people for whom the difference between housed and homeless was often just a single missed paycheck or medical emergency. "Miguel, can you help get the family settled in the back room?" called Reverend James Patterson, the shelter director. A man in his 60s with the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades witnessing both human cruelty and unexpected kindness, he moved through the organized chaos with quiet efficiency. Miguel nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. 6 months of working at Goodwill had given him a different perspective on helping others. No longer the recipient of charity, but not quite secure enough to forget what desperation felt like, he occupied a middle ground that allowed him to translate between worlds. The family room was filling up with parents and children, their possessions stuffed into garbage bags and backpacks, faces carrying the particular exhaustion that came from having nowhere to go on a night when everyone else was home. Miguel recognized the expression, the careful neutrality that masked both hope and fear, the way people held themselves when they needed help but weren't sure they deserved it. In the corner, a young mother sat with 2 small children, a girl about 8 and a boy maybe 5. The woman looked to be in her mid-20s, but her eyes held the wariness of someone who'd aged quickly under pressure. Her daughter sat pressed against her side, while the boy fidgeted with a small toy car, its paint worn away by loving hands. Miguel approached them carefully, the way he'd learned to approach skittish animals or frightened people. "Evening, folks. I'm Miguel. I help out here during the holidays. Can I get you anything? Something hot to drink, maybe a snack for the kids." The woman looked up, her initial suspicion softening slightly when she saw the genuine concern in his face. "That's very kind. Maybe some hot chocolate for them, if you have it." "We do. What are your names?" "I'm Angela Rodriguez. This is Sophia and this is Marcus." She gestured to her children with the fierce protectiveness Miguel recognized from his own memories of childhood, when his mother had held him the same way during their own family's difficult times. "Nice to meet you all. You folks from around here?" Angela shook her head. "Austin. We were staying with my sister, but her landlord said too many people were living there, and we had to leave. I've got a job interview Monday at the hospital here, so we came up early, but the motel said our credit card was declined," and she stopped, the familiar frustration of explaining circumstances that spiraled beyond anyone's control. Miguel nodded with the kind of understanding that came from experience rather than sympathy. Those interviews at the hospital are good opportunities. What kind of work? Housekeeping. It's not much, but it has benefits, and they said there's room to move up if you work hard. Benefits matter, Miguel agreed. Especially with kids. Let me get that hot chocolate. When he returned with the drinks and a plate of cookies, Marcus had fallen asleep against his mother's shoulder, while Sophia sat quietly watching the other families around them. Her eyes held the particular alertness of children who'd learned to read adult moods for signs of safety or danger. Is this like camping? Sophia asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Angela's expression tightened, and Miguel could see her struggling with how to answer. How do you explain homelessness to an 8-year-old without destroying their sense of security? How do you maintain hope while acknowledging reality? It's like camping, Miguel said gently, settling into a nearby chair. Except warmer, and with better food. And lots of new people to meet. Sophia considered this. My mom says we're having an adventure. Your mom's right. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones you didn't plan. Miguel glanced at Angela, seeing gratitude mixed with worry in her expression. What's your favorite thing about adventures, Sophia? Meeting new people, she said promptly. And seeing new places. But I miss my toys. What kind of toys? Books, mostly. I like to read. Mom says I read better than some 5th graders. Miguel smiled. That's impressive. What's your favorite book? As Sophia launched into an animated description of the Magic Treehouse series, Miguel found himself thinking about the complexity of her situation. Here was a bright, curious child whose world had been disrupted through no fault of her own. Her mother was working, trying to improve their circumstances, but the mathematics of poverty meant that even small setbacks could cascade into homelessness. But what struck him most was the resilience he saw in both Angela and her children. The way they maintained dignity despite circumstances designed to strip it away. The way Angela spoke about her job interview with cautious hope, the way Sophia turned their displacement into an adventure story, the way Marcus slept peacefully in his mother's arms despite being in an unfamiliar place. You know, Miguel said during a pause in Sophia's book report, I work at the Goodwill store here in town. We get lots of good books donated. If your mom says it's okay, maybe you could come by after her interview and pick out some new reading material. Sophia's eyes widened. Really? New books? Well, new to you. And there's no charge for kids who are excellent readers. Angela looked at him sharply, recognizing the kindness beneath the practical offer. That's very generous, but we can't accept. Sure you can, Miguel interrupted gently. It's not charity. It's just neighbors helping neighbors. Besides, those books are just sitting there hoping someone will read them. Sophia would be doing them a favor. The rest of the evening passed in the familiar rhythm of shelter life, meals served, sleeping arrangements sorted, quiet conversations in languages of several different countries. Miguel moved through it all with the ease of someone who understood both sides of the transaction, helping where he could, offering dignity along with assistance. Near midnight, as most of the families had settled down for the night, he found himself in conversation with Reverend Patterson. They stood by the kitchen window, watching the ice storm transform the parking lot into a field of frozen diamonds. You're good at this, the Reverend observed. The families trust you in a way they don't always trust the volunteers. They can tell you understand their situation. Miguel considered this. I remember what it felt like to need help and not know if I deserved it. That makes it easier to offer help without making people feel like they have to earn it. The difference between charity and grace, Reverend Patterson mused. One makes the giver feel better about themselves. The other makes the receiver feel better about themselves. Is there a difference? All the difference in the world. Charity creates dependency. Grace creates possibility. Miguel thought about Angela and her children, about the job interview that could change their trajectory, about Sophia's love of reading and Marcus's trust that his mother would keep him safe. They didn't need pity or condescension. They needed temporary shelter, practical support, and the kind of encouragement that acknowledged their strength rather than their weakness. I'd like to do more of this, Miguel said suddenly. Not just holidays, but regular volunteering. I know what it's like to be invisible. Maybe I can help other people feel seen. Reverend Patterson smiled. I hoped you'd say that. We could use someone with your experience on a regular basis. Someone who understands that homelessness isn't a moral failing, it's a housing problem. As Miguel walked home through the ice-glazed streets, he found himself thinking about the mathematics of miracle. Not the grand, obvious interventions that appeared in religious texts, but the smaller, daily mathematics of grace multiplying through human connection. Angela's job interview might lead to stable housing, which might give Sophia the security she needed to flourish academically, which might inspire her to help other children facing similar challenges. Or it might not. The variables were too complex, the outcomes too dependent on factors beyond any individual's control. But that uncertainty didn't diminish the importance of the effort. Faith, Miguel was learning, wasn't about controlling outcomes. It was about showing up consistently with whatever you had to offer, trusting that small acts of love had their own momentum. His apartment welcomed him with warmth and silence. As he prepared for bed, Miguel opened his Bible to a passage in Matthew. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. The words felt different now than they had during his years of homelessness, when he'd read them as a promise that someone, somewhere, might offer him the kindness described. Now they felt like a job description, a blueprint for how to live in the space between receiving grace and offering it to others. Spring arrived in Pflugerville with the suddenness of a Texas season change, transforming the landscape overnight from winter brown to an impossible green that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. Miguel sat on a bench outside the Goodwill store during his lunch break, watching the oak trees unfurl their new leaves and thinking about the nature of time. 18 months since he'd moved into his apartment. 14 months since he'd started working. 6 months since he'd begun volunteering regularly at the shelter. The milestones felt both significant and arbitrary, markers on a journey that had begun the moment he'd reached for Isabella's hand on that rainy afternoon decades ago. His phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella. Mom and I are driving up this weekend. Can we take you to lunch? There's something we want to discuss with you. Miguel stared at the message, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied unexpected attention. Over the past year, he'd spoken with Isabella monthly, their conversations ranging from updates on his job to stories about her students to discussions of the Guardian Angel Project's expanding programs. But they'd never met in person since that day under the bridge, never translated their phone relationship into physical presence. He texted back, "Of course. Looking forward to seeing you both." Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made Texas tolerable. Clear skies, gentle breeze, temperature in the mid-70s. Miguel spent the morning cleaning his apartment with the kind of nervous energy that came from wanting to make a good impression on people who already knew him at his worst. When the knock came at his door, he opened it to find two women who looked enough alike to obviously be mother and daughter, but different enough to represent distinct generations and experiences. Maria Elena had aged gracefully into her 60s, her hair silver now, but her posture still carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. Isabella was tall and elegant, with the particular radiance that came from someone who loved their work and was loved in return. But it was Isabella's expression that struck him most. The way she looked at him with obvious affection mixed with something that might have been awe, as if she were seeing not just the man who'd helped her, but the living proof that childhood trauma could be transformed into adult purpose. "Miguel," she said, and her voice held all the warmth of their phone conversations. "It's so good to finally see you again." The embrace that followed felt natural despite their long separation. The kind of hug shared between people who'd been connected by crisis and remained connected by choice. When they separated, Miguel saw tears in Isabella's eyes that matched his own. "Look at you," Maria Elena said, studying his face with the professional assessment of a longtime nurse. "You look healthy. Happy." "I am," Miguel realized, and the admission surprised him with its simplicity. I really am. They drove to a restaurant downtown, one of those places that specialized in comfort food and conversation. Over chicken fried steak and sweet tea, they caught up on the details of their lives. Isabella's expanding family, Maria Elena's approaching retirement, Miguel's growing involvement with the shelter, and his unexpected satisfaction with retail work. But eventually, the conversation turned to what Isabella had described as something they wanted to discuss. The Guardian Angel project has grown beyond anything we originally imagined, Isabella began. We're serving over 300 families now, providing everything from emergency housing assistance to job training to childcare support. But we've reached a point where we need to expand our staff, bring in people who understand our mission not just intellectually, but experientially. Miguel nodded, uncertain where the conversation was heading, but sensing its significance. We'd like to offer you a position, Maria Elena continued. Outreach coordinator. Your job would be connecting with homeless individuals and families, helping them navigate services, advocating for them with other agencies, and providing the kind of support that can only come from someone who's been there. Miguel set down his fork, processing the offer. I don't have any formal training in social work. No degree, no credentials. You have 27 years of field experience, Isabella replied. You have credibility with the population we serve that no amount of classroom training can provide. And you have something else, the ability to see people's potential when they've forgotten it themselves. The position would mean leaving Goodwill, trading the comfortable routine he'd established for something new and uncertain. It would mean higher pay, benefits, the opportunity to help people in ways that went beyond finding them discounted clothes and treating them with dignity. But more than that, it would mean stepping fully into the life that had been waiting for him since that rainy afternoon. Not just receiving grace, but becoming an instrument of it. I need to think about it, Miguel said carefully. Of course, Isabella replied. Take all the time you need. But Miguel, she paused, searching for the right words. That day you saved me. You didn't just change my life. You changed the trajectory of everyone my life has touched since then. My students, the families our foundation serves, my own children. The ripple effects of kindness are impossible to calculate. As they drove him home, Miguel found himself thinking about inheritance. Not the financial kind, but the less tangible legacy that passed between people who chose to act with courage and compassion. Isabella had inherited his willingness to help strangers. The families served by the Guardian Angel Project had inherited her commitment to their dignity. His future clients would inherit all of it, a chain of grace stretching backward and forward through time. That evening, he called Dorothy Chun and invited her over for coffee. She arrived with a plate of homemade cookies and the patient attention of someone who'd learned to listen for the important things people didn't quite know how to say. I've been offered a job, Miguel began, then found himself telling her about Isabella, about the foundation, about the opportunity to turn his experience of homelessness into professional expertise in helping others escape it. Dorothy listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, asking questions that helped him clarify his own thoughts. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You're scared, she observed finally. Terrified, Miguel admitted. What if I'm not good at it? What if I can't handle the responsibility? What if you succeed? Dorothy interrupted gently. What if you're exactly the person they need, and exactly the person you're meant to become? The question hung in the air between them, challenging and hopeful in equal measure. 27 years ago, you saw a child in danger and chose to act, even though it was risky, even though you had nothing to gain from it. You made that choice based on who you were, not on who you thought you should be. This is the same choice, just bigger. Miguel considered this. The man who'd reached for Isabella's hand had been broken, desperate, seemingly without resources or prospects. But he'd also been someone who couldn't stand by while harm came to an innocent person. That core identity hadn't changed, even as circumstances had transformed around it. "I think I want to say yes," he said slowly. Dorothy smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "Then you should say yes. The world needs more people who understand that everyone deserves to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel like they matter." 2 weeks later, Miguel gave his notice at Goodwill. Jennifer hugged him with genuine enthusiasm when he explained about the new position, and his coworkers threw him a small party complete with a cake decorated with the words, "Guardian Angel." The phrase embarrassed and moved him in equal measure. His last day at the store was a Thursday in late spring. As he was cleaning out his locker, he found a card signed by dozens of customers, people whose names he'd never learned, but whose stories he'd become part of in small ways. Mrs. Henderson had written, "Thank you for always helping me reach the high shelves and never making me feel old." Mr. Peterson had added, "You made shopping here feel like visiting friends instead of charity." But it was a note from Angela Rodriguez that stopped him cold. "Sophia got accepted to the gifted program at her new school. She says it's because you told her excellent readers deserve excellent books. Thank you for seeing her potential when we couldn't see our own." Miguel folded the card carefully and put it in his wallet, next to the worn photo of his grandmother. Some inheritances, he was learning, passed in both directions, forward through time and backward through memory, connecting generations of people who chose to believe in possibility despite evidence to the contrary. On Monday morning, he would start his new job as outreach coordinator for the Guardian Angel Project. He would meet with families facing eviction, individuals sleeping rough, children whose circumstances had placed them at risk. He would navigate bureaucracies, advocate for services, provide the kind of support that acknowledged both vulnerability and strength. But first, he had one more weekend in the life he'd built piece by piece, relationship by relationship, small choice by small choice. Saturday evening found him at the community shelter, serving dinner to people whose faces reminded him of his own reflection in storefront windows during those long years of invisibility. As he ladled soup into bowls, Miguel found himself silently thanking each person who'd helped him reach this moment: Maria Elena's professional competence and personal generosity, Isabella's ability to transform trauma into purpose, Dorothy's quiet wisdom, Jennifer's belief in dignity-based customer service, Reverend Patterson's understanding that grace created possibility rather than dependency. But mostly, he found himself thinking about the mathematics of miracle again. Not the dramatic interventions that demanded recognition, but the steady accumulation of small choices that added up to transformation. One child helped, leading to one life saved, leading to one foundation started, leading to hundreds of families served, leading to one man found, leading to however many people he might be able to help in the years ahead. The equation was too complex to solve completely, the variables too numerous to track with precision. But Miguel was beginning to understand that faith wasn't about solving the equation. Faith was about trusting that the mathematics were sound, that love multiplied when shared, that small acts of courage created their own momentum across time. As he served the last bowl of soup and began cleaning the kitchen, Miguel whispered a prayer of gratitude for the mystery of it all, for the inexplicable way that brokenness could become strength, invisibility could become insight, and receiving grace could transform into offering it to others. Outside the shelter windows, the Texas night settled over Pflugerville with its familiar weight of possibility and uncertainty. Somewhere in the darkness, other people were making choices that would ripple forward through decades. Other strangers were deciding whether to help or walk away, to see or remain blind, to act or abstain. Miguel finished wiping down the last table and turned off the lights, stepping out into a world where angels wore faces he was still learning to recognize, where miracles accumulated like compound interest, and where faith meant showing up with whatever you had to offer and trusting that it would be enough. The inheritance he'd received from that rainy afternoon 27 years ago was finally ready to be passed on. All he had to do was keep reaching out his hand to whoever needed it next, believing that grace would continue to multiply in ways he might never fully understand, but would always have reason to trust. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another, in the endless cycle of opportunities to choose love over fear, action over inaction, hope over despair. Miguel walked home through streets that held both shadows and streetlights, carrying with him the knowledge that even in the darkest places, someone was always reaching toward the light.